All right.
Now we got a mic. Well, I'm going to turn it sideways since I cannot see over the podium. Being the shortest person in the room. So let me begin by thanking Ms. Lucy Thompson of the Rensselaer class of 2001, who will be joining our panel in a few minutes for actually sponsoring us in this wonderful place as a member of the Cosmos Club. I also want to give a shout out to Mr. Don Drexler of the Rensselaer class of 1989 and 90, who is president of our Washington, D.C. and Baltimore alumni chapter, and thank him for his leadership. Now this evening, we will enjoy the latest in our Global Game Changer series, which brings together our alumni and alumnae who are leaders in their fields, along with distinguished Rensselaer faculty and some administrative leaders, to consider some of the most exciting developments and challenges that sit at the nexus of technology, business, government, and academia. And today we're going to discuss cybersecurity in what has been termed the fourth industrial revolution, a revolution in which the digital, the physical, and the biological worlds have come together and are merging. Now, before this current age of interconnection, one that people talk about all the time, the security of our information systems was largely about disaster recovery, the physical protection of data from a power outage or some other disaster such as a flood. But today, digital information no longer sits behind a moat. You know, many people say, and I say, that moats don't work. And instead, our data lives in an ecosystem where there are bad actors that range from hackers whose purpose is mischief, to cyber criminals, to cyber terrorists, to states engaging in cyber warfare, all capable of exploiting infinite points of entry. And the more digital data we generate and depend upon, and the more that data is connected, and the harder and harder it is to protect, as the surface area, or as we used to like to say in physics, the cross-section, becomes larger and larger. Now, the threat, in fact, is end-to-end, beginning with chips themselves as we move from a foundry model in which design and manufacture are separated. And frankly, because how we started with the manufacture of chips had more to do with performance than thinking about these issues, but extends through operating systems and the networks that are readily compromised by the proliferation of quote-unquote Internet of Things connected devices with weak security controls and protocols. And it's accelerating with the increasing use of something I think is very important, but it provides another cross-sectional area, and that is edge computing, or computation and analytics at the level of the device, in order to, among other things, eliminate transmission times in moving data. Now, as individuals, our privacy and financial security, frankly, are at risk. Gatekeepers of our social and financial data, from Facebook to Yahoo to Equifax, have failed to guard the gates. And frankly, the number of you have been in the government, so I get a little letter from OPM saying, well, some of your data is lost. But never worry, we have Equifax taking care of it. And then if you go beyond that, given the proliferation of genetic profiling, whether it is used to establish family histories or to pinpoint a susceptibility to inherited diseases, to understanding gene expression in any given disease, even our privacy at the level of the DNA may be subject to threat. But the threats are present not just at the scale of the individual, but at the systemic level as well. And at our 212th Rensselaer commencement this past Saturday in the rain, we presented an honorary degree to Mary Jo White, the former chair of the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. She held that position from 2013 to 2017. And as you may know, before she did that job, she was U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, where she actually prosecuted cybercrime and successfully prosecuted the bombers, the first bombers of the World Trade Center, those who bombed it in 1993. And Mary Jo believes that the single greatest threat to the global financial system is not a housing bubble or an expanding derivative market or even cyber or even rather cryptocurrencies, but a failure of cybersecurity. And she articulated that when she was with us. And of course, the rise of cyber-physical systems, particularly industrial control systems, means that infrastructure critical to our economy could be destroyed remotely. Now, a system that I worry a lot about, but it's still pretty air-gapped, are the systems that control nuclear facilities, nuclear power plants in particular. But as you know, hackers connected to the government of Russia are not only implicated in the interference with the 2016 presidential election, but also in cyber intrusions into nuclear, water, and energy, aviation, and critical manufacturing facilities in the United States. Now, the danger is not merely that infrastructure critical to our economy could be shut down, but that the infrastructure itself could be weaponized. In Saudi Arabia, a cyber attack last year on a petrochemical plant was designed not merely to erase data or to shut down the plant, but instead to trigger an explosion. And only a mistake in the hacker's computer code prevented this from happening. Now, so in the end, this is about national security, including our ability to gather intelligence. And as some of you probably know, I was co-chair in the latter part of the Obama administration of the President's Intelligence Advisory Board. And as you know, hacking tools have been stolen from both the Central Intelligence Agency and from the National Security Agency. And in fact, the NSA breach meant that millions of people around the world were subject to ransomware and other forms of mayhem, but importantly, they know too much about how we've done things. And should our financial system or power infrastructure or global supply chains be compromised by cyber attack, the very interconnectedness of humanity leaves us subject, when there is a triggering event, to what I refer to as intersecting vulnerabilities with cascading consequences. So even as our Rensselaer faculty, and you're going to hear from one of our brilliant faculty this evening, use the opportunities presented by the Fourth Industrial Revolution to create powerful new tools of analysis, diagnosis, design, management, and creatively. They also are researching ways to shore up cybersecurity from many angles, whether in the control systems used by power plants, in the automated detection of terrorist networks, or in the development of what we sometimes, and I refer to as the intelligent Internet of intelligent things, where both the devices at the edge and the central network itself are smart and adaptive, so that perhaps we can design systems for an end-to-end immune-like response to cyber attack. Now, such systems would be able to detect suspicious activity anywhere in the network, and there are systems beginning to do this, but then to shut down the compromised part of the network and then to automatically reconfigure it. Now, that's an interesting challenge, but I believe that's where we have to go. Now, finally, our guests will be pleased to know that the next generation of leaders in this arena is firmly focused on problems of cybersecurity. In fact, one of our most popular student clubs on our Troy campus is our Computer Security Club, called RPI-SEC, which in fact took first place in the signature Capture the Flag event at the most recent New York University Cybersecurity Awareness Week Games, the world's largest student cybersecurity competition. So we don't play. So clearly, our faculty and students are breaking new ground. Now, speaking of breaking new ground, before I introduce our panelists, I do have to tell you this. I would like to invite all of you to attend our scholarship gala to be held this coming October 24th at the J.W. Marriott Essex House in New York City, followed by a performance by the Rensselaer Orchestra at Carnegie Hall. Now, the evening celebrates the creation of our new Bachelor of Science degree program in music, as well as supports our billion-dollar capital campaign that we have titled Transformative Campaign for Global Change. And that campaign, as you probably know, has 3 pillars intended to strengthen the Institute for continued global leadership in the 21st century. The first and the largest and most important is focused on increasing student financial aid and with that enhancing the student experience. Now, the cost of the education we offer at Rensselaer that is world-class, immersive, experiential, and at the leading edge itself technologically, requires us to strengthen our ability to offer financial aid, and we intend to increase our endowment to close the gap between need and aid in order to attract and retain the most talented students, regardless of means. And yes, we focus very strongly on cost and cost control. So you can ask me about it, and I'll tell you some statistics that will surprise you. Our second pillar focuses on our faculty, and we intend to use the resources unleashed by the campaign to create more endowed professorships that will allow us to attract and retain the very best academic talent from around the world. And when you meet one of our faculty tonight, you'll understand what I mean. And we intend to expand our tenured and tenure-track faculty to 500 so that we can achieve intellectual critical mass and lead in all the crucial areas of research and education that comport with our founding mission, the application of science to the common purposes of life. And of course, the third pillar focuses on our beautiful Troy campus, and I will admonish those of you who have not been back lately, because it is a beautiful place. But we intend to expand, modernize, and equip the campus for continued leadership in pedagogy, in research, and in, of course, the student experience. So please join us for that gala in New York City. And now I have the great pleasure of introducing our panelists. Our first panelist is the director, who I've been alluding to all through my remarks, of the Rensselaer Institute for Data Exploration and Applications, and who is the Tetherless World Professor, we have long names, of Computer Web and Cognitive Sciences at Rensselaer. He also heads the Rensselaer IBM Center for Health Empowerment by Analytics, Learning, and Semantics, or HEALS, and serves as chair of the board of the United Kingdom-based Web Science Trust. An expert in the semantic web, in fact, one of the original developers of the semantic web, in artificial intelligence and agent-based computing, Professor Hendler was appointed in 2015 as a member of the United States Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Advisory Committee. His most recent book is Social Machines, the Coming Collision of Artificial Intelligence, Social Networks, and Humanity. Now, he holds a Bachelor of Science degree from Yale University, wrong school, a Master's in Cognitive Psychology from Southern Methodist University, and both a Master's and a Doctorate in Computer Science from Brown University. So please join me in welcoming Professor James Hendler. Our next panelist is president of RKM Consultants, which provides marketing, business development, financial, and operational consulting services to firms focused on enterprise and public sector markets. As an entrepreneur and an executive, he has more than 36 years of experience in the telecommunications and information technology industries. We even worked for the same company at one point. With extensive management experience in mergers and acquisitions, and business development, finance, and operations. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in computer science from Rensselaer, an MBA in finance from the University of Detroit, and a Juris Doctorate from the Wayne State Law School. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Rodney Martin of the Rensselaer class of 1975. Our next panelist is the principal and founder of Fractal Consulting, a boutique cybersecurity consulting firm. He previously enjoyed a 35-year career with AT&T, where he was the AT&T Chief Security Architect and a distinguished member of the technical staff, as was I. In 1995, he was awarded the Intelligence Community SEAL Medallion, the highest award given by the United States intelligence community to a non-government employee. He received both his Bachelor of Science and Master's in Electrical Engineering from Rensselaer and holds 6 patents. Please, ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Mr. Duncan Sparrow of the classes of 1977 and 78. Our next panelist is a founding principal of Livingston PLC, a Washington, D.C. law firm that focuses on legal and technology issues related to cybersecurity and global data privacy, healthcare, and compliance and risk management. She is the author of numerous articles and book chapters on a wide range of security and emergency management topics. She received the BA in Political Science and Economics from Connecticut College and MS in Management from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and holds a JD degree from the Georgetown University Law Center. Please join me in welcoming our host, Lucy Thompson of the class of 2001.
Thank you. Great.
And now, I will introduce our moderator. And remember what I told you about long titles. Who is the Vice President for Information Services and Technology and Chief Information Officer at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. He was instrumental in helping me to establish the Center for Computational Innovations, or the CCI, at Rensselaer. The CCI houses AMOS, the Advanced Multiprocessing Optimized System, a petaflop supercomputer that is the most powerful at an American private university, and Watson, the physical instantiation of Watson. We also have it in the cloud, which is the remarkable IBM cognitive computing platform that Rensselaer alumni at IBM were instrumental in developing. Basically, they developed it. Now, he is the principal investigator for the New York State High Performance Computing Consortium, and currently is working with teams from Rensselaer and IBM on groundbreaking research projects in cognitive immersive systems and machine learning. He's my key partner in many things, including a recently launched multi-year partnership with IBM on artificial intelligence and machine learning. He received his bachelor's and master's degree in electrical engineering from Rensselaer. Please, ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Mr. John Kolb of the classes of 1979 and 1983. And now I'll turn the platform over to this distinguished panel, and especially to John.
Okay, thank you. There's one seat left. I guess it's me. Let me face this group. I know I have to face them if I'm going to have a chance of managing this this evening. So the one, excuse me, Lucy. The one thing I was delighted to find when I started talking to this group is once we get going on a topic, we're off to the races. So I think this will be very enjoyable for all of you. I think what we'll try to do for a format is I'll ask a few questions, see if we can warm things up here a little bit, and then I'd ask all of you to get your really hard questions ready for this group. particularly our students that are in the audience with us tonight. And Lucy, we're over on the safe side, so I'll start with Ms. Thompson here. You've had a lot of experience in industry, government. How about if you just set the stage for what do you see as the worldwide cyber threats and what concerns you the most?
Well, it's a good question to start with. Dr. Jackson did such a beautiful job of describing many of the threats. I worked at the Justice Department for nearly 25 years prosecuting white-collar crime, and then going to RPI was pivotal in launching my career in technology. So I've been following data breaches since I became chair of the American Bar Association section of Science and Technology Law. So the worldwide threat assessment the intelligence community publishes every year is a really good summary of the cyber threats. And Iran, China, Russia, and Korea are the main nation states that are launching these highly publicized attacks. And they range from targeting law firms to the Sony breach, taking over the Bowman Dam involving critical infrastructure, interference in the US elections and around the world. So these countries have had quite an impact, and they've certainly gotten the attention of many people who are paying close attention to these problems. So those are the problems that we really have to pay attention to. The other threat that I find very serious is insider threats. And being a lawyer and a technology expert, I wrote a book chapter on threats for a law firm security book. And a Panama law firm that's very famous called Mossack Fonseca was literally 40 years of private data was stolen by an insider who sent it to journalists, and it was known as the Panama Papers were published, and the repercussions were this insider disclosed all sorts of criminal activity, and people from governments were fired, and there was huge fallout. So that's just one example of the other side, hacker versus insider. So those are just a few of the things that I keep an eye on.
Just a few things. That's great. Thanks. So Dr. Hendler, you've also had a lot of experience in your career, industry, government, higher ed. Can you expand on the cyber threats of what Dr. Jackson's talked about, what Ms. Thompson has talked about, and particular cyber and cyber physical?
Yeah, thanks, John. So I think Dr. Jackson did a great job of outlining what some of the challenges are in terms of what we need to protect. A lot of people, when they think about cyber physical, are thinking cell phones or thinking the refrigerator. And those things are important, but that's not really where people are going to get killed, right? It's not really where a major attack caused either by accident or on purpose can occur. So when you talk about things like a nuclear plant, when you talk about things that have managed to move from the cyber world to the physical world, the most famous is Stuxnet, where a cyber-enabled attack was able to shut down Iranian centrifuges for nuclear processing. So we kind of know what the threat scenario is. And I'm actually going to take a slightly different direction, John, because one of the things that's so challenging about all this is there's a social dimension as well as a technical dimension. Some of the ways people have broken through those air gaps, the separation of here's the open internet, here's the thing in my nuclear plant, has been by getting people to move things that they shouldn't, tricking people, things like that. So one of the really exciting things going on in this field now, especially with the growth of AI, machine learning, is how we start putting together what we know about the technical threats, what we know is coming from these social kind of impacts, and then what we see happening as more and more of these physical plants are getting hooked in various ways to the cyber infrastructure. So it really becomes a very complex systems type problem with people as one of the moving parts, as it were. And so modeling that, understanding that, and figuring out where to build in the secure pieces, how do I keep things separate, is really a very exciting challenge at the research level now.
That's great, and I agree with you. I think this is a systems type problem. So let's keep building to that. Mr. Sparrow, and I'm going to be tired of saying this all night to this panel. You also have a lot of experience, but given that background, can you discuss the economics of cyber and particularly risk management? Because I think that's where we're heading here. So.
Yeah, happy to. It's one of the things I'm passionate about. So when I started school, I went to school with the slide rules. The world was a very different place back then. I first got involved in cyber back in the first Iraqi war. Worked for AT&T my whole career, but at that point I was supporting the intelligence community, doing some very important things that I'm quite proud of, but can't talk about because it's all classified. And so I had the right clearances when the war started, and they said, hey, Duncan, we need you to help with this particular technical problem. And they brought me down to this thing called the Air Force Information Warfare Center, and that was where the U.S. military weaponized cyber. And this is 1990 now. Many of you in the room look around, they weren't even born yet. But for us, that was a very, very radical topic. And one of the things that I learned there was how much it is easier to be an attacker than a defender. And so I spent basically the rest of my career being a defender. I always take the hard problems. But working for AT&T, we looked at things very differently than the commercial world or the legal world did. We turn everything into money. And I do think that is a very good metric, and it's been very useful. And I think one of the current failures of the cybersecurity industry at the moment is I think we do too good a job at scaring you. Hopefully you've all got a little bit of fear, uncertainty, and doubt based on the things that the previous speakers have said. And fear is a good thing. It's a thing the human body evolved with to teach us to pay attention to things. So hopefully you'll start people are paying more attention to cybersecurity right now. But I think we've went too far in that direction. There's just in the industry we call it FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. There's too much FUD. The current cybersecurity industry is scheduled to grow to be $1 trillion over the next 5 years. That is a really, really big number. And it's really too big a number. We really should not be spending that much money because we're doing it based on our gut instinctive fear reaction, not on using good engineering judgment like we were taught at RPI, how to turn all engineering problems into basically using good judgment on it, using good ethics. The particular tagline of my hacker firm is think evilly, act ethically. So it's important to have both aspects of that in what you do. But I think that there's really some good academic work out recently by Hubbard and Searson on basically how to learn from other industries that have had a lot of chaotic uncertainty associated with risk and turn that into actually mathematical models, statistical methods that you can actually decompose the problem, add them back together. It's not red, yellow, green charts like some people use in cybersecurity. It's literally what's it going to cost you to fix the problem that occurs. Target's still in business. It didn't go out of business after it got hacked. It did have to spend a lot of money to get back to where it was. And again, you can quantify that. You can turn it from a qualitative, hey, it's a bad thing, you might get hacked, you might get fired, into this is what it's worth. And you should be then looking at what's causing those costs and driving it back up the food chain to get better supplier security, and you can do it all with economics.
Although you did start by moving us up Maslow's hierarchy to fear first.
Well, that's what sells, and the cybersecurity industry sells based on that. So I did it too.
That's great. Well, thanks. Mr. Martin, and by the way, this is the last time I'm going to do the Mr. Mrs.
Yeah,
please.
But Mr. Martin, you shared with me when we first talked that you're in the first graduating class of computer scientists from Rensselaer. Congratulations. So you may have a better perspective than maybe the rest of us in terms of how has the computer science field changed, and from those early beginnings, and how, as it's changed, what do you see going forward in terms of the change? Are we at a plateau, or are we at an inflection point? Where are we?
Yeah, thank you. So I entered as a math major because RPI didn't have a computer science degree. And we went off to industry, and we came back after the first year, and they created a math comp program, degree program, which kind of like what it sounds like. It was not nothing either one way or the other. went away for another summer, came back, and we did, in fact, have a computer science degree program, which is one of the unique things about RPI, that they were able to move that fast, a university to, in fact, create a program, get it degreed, and have us go back and catch up classes. As seniors, there were 7 or 8 of us that went back and got a sophomore class, but the professor fortunately didn't grade us with everybody else for their sake. My grandchildren would say we lived in the dark ages because we came in with slide rules. One Christmas we came back with TI somethings, right? The little thing with the red thing. You all remember it, right?
Yes, our pen, yep.
And that and the pocket protector, okay? And your green card, right? You know, so you talked in hexadecimal. So there was no internet, there was no cell phone, there was no cable TV other than as an extender. So there was no HBO or ESPN, no instant news, no Twitter, none of that from that standpoint. So there was no cybersecurity. Okay, the biggest risk I think the university had, which still is probably there, but it had to be done by batch, was some student might want to change a grade every now and then, but not at RPI. We know that, right? But that was it. Where now everything is online. Everything has moved faster. So in the world of cyber and tool sets, it used to be that if you developed something, offensive weapon of some type, you had 2 or 3 years before you had to worry about the other guy getting it. And then it went to a year, then it went to a month, and where now the thinking is, and rightfully so, is if you develop something, you have to develop the countermeasure before you release it, because somebody's going to have it as soon as you release it from that standpoint. And so things are just faster, which are good things, okay, from that standpoint. But the downside is the whole industry has to move faster also. And we have to think about how do we stop the problem differently, which may go against our normal thinking process as far as liberties from that standpoint. I'm a strong proponent that the carriers have an ability to stop stuff before it happens because they see it before anybody else. Okay, as Duncan was talking about, stop it at the source. So if you see a day 0 attack coming, who's going to see that first? More likely AT&T, and not just because I consult for them. Okay, but because of the amount of data traffic that runs through their network, they're going to see it first, and then Verizon. Okay, and then Deutsche Telekom or somebody like that. And so they have the ability to see it before it maybe gets to the end user and then stop it. And that's not how we're made historically. That's not how the industry grew up. So, okay.
Thank you. And we'll come back to a couple of those items too. So let me touch on first, and Duncan, maybe I'll ask you, whose job is cybersecurity? I mean, you mentioned AT&T. Is it just the carriers? Is it layer 1? Where is it?
How many hours do we have? No.
Yeah, right.
So the quick answer is everybody's, but breaking it down, looking at some of the roles, the U.S. government has a role, particularly against the executive branch of the government, should be protecting us against foreign nation states. I shouldn't have to be smart enough to protect myself against the Russians, or the Chinese, or the French, or the Israelis, or the British, or the Canadians, or the et cetera, because it's a pretty wild west out there in the cyber world. The legislative branch needs to, flanked by 2 lawyers here, needs to up its game a little bit, because cyber is a very fast evolving field, and law is not known to be a fast evolving field, and there are really a lot of issues. There's been some good legislation of late. It's still there's some good stuff in draft form at the moment, but there's still a lot that'll have to be gotten through. There's a role for industry, and not just the cybersecurity industry, not just the people you're spending that $1 trillion on, but the rest of industry, that they need to protect themselves. The targets of the world need to do an adequate job. They should be using at least as good as best practice. And there are a lot of people in industry that are not there yet, that we need to get there. So role for academia, both in the research end, which we talked about before, is a lot of really hard problems that got to get solved, but also from the very practical end of we need more cybersecurity people. We're about 1 million jobs short at the moment. So we need more of just the people who can do the practitioners. Yes, we do need the research, but we also just need to crank out the engineers. And RPI is, like we talked about, is doing a good job of that. I'm actually one of the sponsors of that RPI Sec club that she talked about, because that's really practical experience that people get that industry is really looking for. But then it's also, it's all of your jobs too. And no, I'm not asking you to be a security system administrator. You're going to learn a lot tonight about security policy and about really hard issues. And you need to, you're here, so thank you for doing that. Learn it and bug your legislature. Tell your congressperson that these issues matter to you and that you care about them. At work, tell your suppliers that, hey, you need to supply me good stuff, not stuff that's really vulnerable because you didn't put the work into security. And at home, similarly with the things you buy. So it's really everybody's job.
Can I just add something to that?
Sure.
You said the government needs to protect us from the Russians and the Chinese and the Iran and Korea. I would take issue with that because the government says that 85% or 90% of the critical infrastructure is owned by private industry. So the government really can't protect us. It can protect itself to the extent that it can figure out how to do that. But there's really a huge amount of responsibility that private sector has. And that's where the problem comes in, is private sector stepping up to do what it needs to do. And also when you look at some of the testimony that these CEOs give about data breaches, they say, oh, this is an unfair fight. Russia, Iran, I can't compete against these places. But when you look at how these breaches occur, they're either phishing attacks, or they're misconfigured websites, or they're point of sale in the retail context. Very simple, somewhat simple problems to solve. So,
Can I counter?
yeah.
Sure.
So I agree to an extent that the industry is responsible for protecting itself, I'll say, from criminal enterprise. Industry does not have the resources to protect itself from foreign nation states. It took me close to 5 years to convince the government to declassify the vulnerabilities they knew about that I was using in gear I designed to protect the US government that I was not allowed to use to protect my own resources because it was classified that you could do this. So I couldn't walk out of the skiff and go say, hey, look, they're not only doing it to the US agencies, they're doing it to our telecom. So there is a role for, I would argue, there is a role for both. The very high-end stuff, the stuff that really is the foreign nation state, not the Target wasn't a foreign nation state thing. It was a criminal enterprise thing. Somebody made a really lot of money from hacking Target and Home Depot and all the other ones. The OPM breach, yeah, that's a different story. But again, that was a government protection anyway. But some of the issues are with government. Some of the issues are with government that they need to be more, I would argue, they need to be more releasing of the vulnerabilities. A big argument in government is called equities, basically the offense versus the defense. And yes, they're using this particular, Microsoft made some mistake in its code, and the government knows about it, and they're using that to basically spy on foreign nation states. So they're getting value from that. I would argue the foreign nation states are getting more value because the fact that we know it means they probably know it too. And if they know it, then they're using it to spy on us. And all said and done, we live in a big glass house. We're way more dependent on technology than the rest of the world is. So I'd argue there is a strong role for government, and some of the protection is just them helping industry protect itself.
So Lucy, I think he's agreeing with you. That's good. You made your point. That's good. So Lucy, let's pick up on something else that Rodney said, and it was kind of touching on privacy. And we talked about this before, but one of the quotes from 20 years ago, when he was CEO of Sun Microsystems from Scott McNeely was, "There is no privacy. Get over it." So let's talk about what are the individual issues here with privacy, and is that a reasonable expectation or not? And certainly, as we sit here, this week is the week that Europe is putting in place the GDPR, the General Data Personal Privacy or Protection. Thank you.
Directive.
Yes, and so how does that all come together, and how does it come together in this country?
Well, this is such an interesting week because the GDPR has really created a global conversation about privacy. And Facebook is really the other part of this because Mark Zuckerberg testified yesterday before the European Parliament. And I've been the consumer privacy ombudsman in 25 cases in bankruptcy where very sensitive data is being sold. So I've been behind the scenes in some of these companies. And it's very interesting because I think a lot of people have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. Because it used to be that data brokers were the big issue. They would collect all this data on all of us from public sources, and then they'd buy loyalty program data, and they do risk scoring, and the FTC issued an interesting report, and that gave people a glimpse into what's going on. But now Facebook is doing so much more. The questions that the people in the European Parliament were asking Facebook were absolutely fascinating. Like, how much data do you collect from non-users? And how much data, how do you analyze the data, and what kind of analytics, and what's informed consent? So the discussion has become really sophisticated. So GDPR is the European way of looking at privacy, which is to have rules for how personal data is collected, used, processed, and transferred. And the US has a sectoral approach, so really only healthcare data, financial, and data about children are protected. So this has really spawned a whole industry, which has been very innovative, figuring out how to collect every scrap of data about us and analyze it and sell it. So they've really teed up the issues this week with the dynamics of the GDPR and Facebook, and it's a pretty interesting situation.
Although I did like the way they asked the questions, where they just asked an hour worth of questions and then let you respond. Maybe I should have tried that with this panel too.
So I look at it a little bit different, and I know we'll never get there, okay? But today, we could create a company and we could go out and gather a bunch of data about you guys, and we could aggregate it from public sources and private sources, and we could create a vulnerability for
Steal
you
everything out, all your cell phones
that
and things.
you didn't approve for us to do, okay? And the problem with that is there's no financial risk to us, okay, for doing that. Okay, there may be a little bit of company risk, okay, but no matter what we do, none of us is going to jail, okay? That's the ultimate deterrent, okay? And as long as we have that type of model that people can go out without your consent to gather all this stuff, okay? And it's not hard. I mean, you can do it fairly quickly if you've been in these systems for a while. And sell it, because it's all about monetizing. I mean, if you look at right now, and I'm not picking on Verizon because they're my local carrier, okay? But you're getting all these things from Oath, okay? Why? Because they're going to monetize Oath to try to challenge Google. And you don't have a choice. Your choice, either accept the privacy terms, which you're not going to read, okay? Or go to Comcast or somebody else that's going to give you some similar until they buy an online platform from that standpoint. So until we get that model turned around a little bit so that there's some real consequences for the leadership of the companies for creating a breach when you didn't give any type of informed consent, I think, we're going to have issues.
So build on that, Rodney. How does society, the problem is technology is always a little bit ahead of society, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do our society as a whole, but our rules of law and other pieces of things catch up?
So let me give you another example, because we need to learn from our mistakes, okay? Everybody know about the Ford Mustang problem, okay, historically? So Ford in the 70s, okay, decided that there was a problem with the gas tank where it was mounted. Pinto? Okay.
Right.
Yeah, it was the Mustang. No, that was Mustang. The Mustang. No,
Maybe
it
the
wasn't.
Mustang, but
Anyway, there was a Ford car that it was mounted in the wrong place, and they knew the fact. And they ran the actuarial saying, so many people are going to die, it's going to cost us so much, but that's better than going back and re-engineer the problem. Okay, so until they got caught, okay, and started paying fines and threatened to send people to jail, the behavior didn't stop, okay? And they say GM to some extent may have done the same thing with the keys, okay? And I have mixed emotions about that, because if you look at some people and the amount of junk they have on their key ring, okay, I have daughters, okay, I have that conversation. Key ring is not meant to have 17 things on it for weight, because it'll pull it down, okay? But same sort of thing, but until there's a case, I hate to say, a class action case where there's enough monetary damage, enough ruining of a company, put a company in bankruptcy. I mean, my standpoint, put Equifax out of business when they had the data breach. You
They
knew
made
it,
money off
and
the
you made
breach.
money off the breach. You know, not only did we create the breach, but we made money off it. But until you put them out of business, and then there's now a deterrent, okay, to everybody else. Oh, we shouldn't do that. Okay, then I don't see the progress being made. At least not in the U.S. It may happen in Europe, and then eventually it'll adopt over here because it's cheaper to have one platform than two, one set of rules than two.
Well, it's interesting because your two different answers. Your answer on technology was you better have the defense ready because the offense is, before you let the offense out the
Right.
door. So technology is moving that fast.
Right.
And class action suits don't move that fast.
But you don't have to punish one.
Well, and ideally, you'd all bug your congressperson that
Yeah.
passed the law before the.
Beforehand.
Interesting.
But the law is that all these cases are being dismissed because the plaintiffs have no standing. Because unless you can demonstrate harm, not just that a data breach might result in identity theft, you have to show you experienced identity theft. So none of these cases are going forward. So there is no consequences.
Oh, I learned how, last summer at a hacker camp, I learned how to hack pacemakers, so I know how to kill someone. I happen to sleep, I have sleep apnea, I happen to sleep on a breathing machine that if a hacker got into it and shut it down in the middle of the night, I would die. So there are, before you hacked into my computer, all right, I can't give the PowerPoint presentation. What's the big deal? Till you start having, but unfortunately, we're at the point now where people can literally die. We just haven't, there's been a few, there haven't been too many yet, but we should be worried.
So Jim, this brings me back to you, and you know, where does the academy fit into this, and particularly, where are the rich things that we can do on the research side to really help move this down, improve this?
Thanks, John. I've sort of been sitting quietly listening to each of these problems, wanting to jump up and say,
Yeah.
but we're working on that.
Right.
Because in fact, that's part of it is when we look at it as a systems problem, there's all these things to do. But let me give you, you know, kind of what I think is a good example, right? All of this privacy stuff we're talking about, are we going to take people to court? Doesn't happen unless we know what happened. It doesn't happen unless we know who's used what data for what where. When we look at cyber physical, right? So I was on a panel for the Air Force, and a lot of what I did there was in the classified report. But in our main report, one of the things we looked at was, you know, we talked about companies like Russia and China. And what happened was originally the cyber guys came in and said, but what would happen if Russia shut down Wall Street with a cyber attack?
Right.
And our answer was, you know, Russia can shut down Wall Street really easily with a nuclear attack, right? What they can't do is do it without us knowing it came from Russia.
Right.
So what we started doing was really looking at what's the difference between the cyber world and sort of standard security models and things like that. And then that identifies where these technological missing pieces are. And I think the job of the academy is to help, one, inform people where those are, but more importantly, to fill those, right? The other thing that's really hard to understand in this game when you're talking about the economics is, again, there's a lot of trade-offs we don't even see. The cost, so Microsoft has vulnerabilities in it, right? They could build you a system that would be virtually impenetrable. It's $50,000 a copy. How many of you are going to go out and buy one, right? And it puts them out of business, right? Because they can't sell at they sell both volume and some higher end things. So again, how do we start looking at where are things we can not only solve these problems, but are there new economies we can bring in? Are there ways we can do things faster? Can we use some of these AI machine learning technologies to recognize some of the vulnerabilities much faster than the kind of testing so that you don't have the issue you said of having to get it out, don't release it yet. So, I mean, there's really a lot of problems. And I think that, the biggest thing we can do at the undergraduate and even graduate education levels is teach people to think like this, right? Biology went through a major change, thinking of itself as individual pieces of cell, organ, et cetera, to systems biology. And we really need computing to undergo this change from, individual machine thinking, protect my device, to systems thinking. And again, it's an engineering discipline, it requires computing, it requires cognitive. So really where we're trying to put some things together. We're actually putting together a group of all the faculty at Rensselaer who are working on cyber in different ways to really come up with what are some of the key issues that we as a university can look at specifically at the research level. So get our undergraduates thinking about the systems and get our grad students looking for where are the gaps and holes and how do we fill them, so that there are technologies available so that folks like you can know what to protect better, know who to sue, know how to do things. So it's really that whole picture has to get filled in, and we have to start identifying where are some of the key places to look.
So Jim, just a follow-on question. This is really open to all of you. If you were going to provide advice to somebody going into the field, maybe they started as a math major and you want them to go to something else. Maybe we're agile enough that we've now put a degree program in for AI machine learning. I think that's going to happen for us. What advice would you give a young person as in terms of what to pursue and what experience to get and so on?
Yeah, what I'm actually advising people nowadays is, so it used to be if you wanted to do cyber, become a computer scientist, right? Now what I say is, do the thing you love and learn about how cyber, how IT programming computers are being used in your area, right? So if you're a manufacturing engineer, all of those machines are online, and that's where some of that cyber physical threat is. So understanding that is something everybody has to do. So we've created this data dexterity program. So for those who don't know, PI will be the first school in America to ask every one of our undergraduates as a graduation requirement to take 2 courses which expose them to data analytics, some of the problems with that. So again, they'll come out understanding what the power of data is, where these privacy threats come from, things like that. At the graduate level, we're putting in more things to get people in the different sub-areas. So somebody who's in biology, somebody who's in chemistry, somebody who's in physics, to understand this stuff. So it's not that we don't have a role for computer science, don't get me wrong. I was chair of the computer science department. But it's really that we need to get everybody to understand this stuff. And I think the university is a great place to start. And for these folks, I think hiring someone who understands this, has both the skill set in law, in engineering, in telecommunications, whatever, but also the knowledge of how to interact, whether it's interacting with the technology itself or interacting with the people who do understand the technology better, saying, this is our real problem. Because that's one of the challenges we really have as a university. It's really hard to show our students what the real world looks like, because so much of this data is protected, fast-changing, unavailable, et cetera. So we make a deal with this company to give us some of that data, so this company did.
So I know the rest of the panel has some thoughts on that, Jim. So this is an open question for everybody.
Well, I want to reinforce one of the things Jim said on it isn't just for the computer geeks. So first of all, if you're thinking of entering the field and you are a computer geek, go for it. Had a very successful career, a lot of fun, a lot of hard problems, a lot of challenges, very rewarding in the things you do. Catching hackers is a fun thing to do. I'll actually say that. But the other point, though, is you don't have to be a computer scientist. I mean, I did spend most of my career writing software, but you don't have to write software to be involved in this field. There's a lot of aspects. There's the legal aspects, the policy aspects. And I think Jim said it very well. Basically, in the world we live in today, there's a cybersecurity aspect to any field that you go into. So wherever your passion is, just remember cybersecurity is part of it and include it there.
Yeah, teaching multidisciplinary approaches to cybersecurity is so important. When I was taking the RPI Management and Technology Masters, we took courses in law, risk management, technology, and I've been now working with thousands of engineers, and I see all these smart engineers innovating, and it seems like the innovation has gotten ahead of the law, ahead of the ethics, maybe ahead of where people feel comfortable. And so there has to be some balance. And also knowing what you don't know is the most important thing. A lot of my colleagues who are lawyers, they like to say they know everything. And so they end up having a very narrow view because technology changes every day. So if you don't understand the magnitude of the developments and the problems, you're not very giving valuable advice to your clients?
So my view is, I'll come from the parent standpoint. You're already doing the basics because RPI is going to give you a very, very strong technical foundation that allows you to pick up the phone and within 1 or 2 phone calls become a semi-expert, or at least knowledgeable on a particular subject matter. Okay, and that's key. The 2 things I would say more important than anything else: do what you want, something that you like, but learn how to read and write. Okay, and that may sound stupid, but as a lawyer with a technical background, I can't tell you how many people I've run into that don't comprehend what they read. Okay, and that's why I guess I have a job. Okay, because we interpret for people that don't comprehend what they read, and then you got to be able to write where other people can understand what you're trying to tell them. Okay, and those are key factors in whatever field you go into.
So why don't I open this up for a few minutes? Are there questions from the audience? And I think we have a mic that we can bring out to you, and we'll start with the gentleman in the back and then over here. Please wait for the mic.
I don't think you'll need the mic.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
If they're recording, are they recording?
Yeah, they are.
You heard all the discussion. I'll bypass my first question area, which is going to be about quantum.
I think they're recording. So it'd be good if you use the mic.
I can manage to project well.
Yeah.
And instead, one of the underlying and overarching points that all of you have alluded to, and is something that the Command and Control Research Program in DoD has been looking at for a number of years, is how to develop the trust between all the communities of interest so that the sharing can be there and the trust is there to protect and watch out for everybody.
But I think there's 2 parts to your answer. It is an unsolved problem. It is an area where research is needed in both the technical field and in the policy field. But there's 2 aspects to the trust. One is, do you know who you're talking to? So there's an attribution issue, okay? And then there's, do you trust them? And then there's the size of the sphere of people that you're talking. I think we're evolving to a more microservices, smaller, one-on-one, more like the internet is. The internet is a big, very complicated thing that's hard to understand. But any given transaction, I type in a URL name and I end up with a web page. And the fact that that involved a bunch of small transactions, one that turned that human readable URL into a bunch of 1s and 0s to determine the address of where to go to, HTTP protocols, a bunch of technical gobbledygook, but all said and done, it was a fairly simple me to that web server transaction. There happen to be trillions of them going on while we're doing it. It's a very complex network. I think that the trust area is evolving into that same break it up into smaller pieces, a single responsibility principle, and then, but that doesn't solve the issue of, well, so I know I'm talking to Mike, okay? Do I trust Mike? That's the different issue, and that's actually, I think, the easier to solve issue once you get it to the more atomic, smaller scale. It's harder to do, and does the Army trust the Navy? It's easier to do it, does Duncan trust Mike? And so I think we have to break it down, but I'm not claiming it's a solved problem.
And at a technological level, we're actually looking at some new mechanisms for how to get people to interact not just with each other, but also with computers. The Cognitive and Immersive Systems Laboratory was mentioned very briefly. So if you look at an insider threat investigation, you have both a technical side, some decision making, a lot of legal and things like that. The question is, could you bring a team together to do that the way we bring together a tumor board? So if you have cancer and it's a difficult to manage cancer, they'll bring a bunch of doctors from different parts of the field together to look and try to figure out a treatment. We need that same kind of thing in cyber, but we need the environments, and we need, because of some of the technical thing, we need computers that can help us understand what are the people talking about, are they hitting the right things, have they missed something? So we're actually looking in some of our advanced research at Rensselaer into how would you build that trust not only between the humans, but between the humans and these intelligent computers that are going to have to be involved in solving these problems.
Great. You had a...
Hi, I'm a 50.
Just keep talking.
Yes, I'm a 53 graduate, so most people are dead.
Congratulations to you.
But I worked in the battery industry for about 44 years, and was a military intelligence officer for 28, so you're sensitive to issues how the Chinese affected the battery industry. And overseas, they had a standard technique of going into a small country where it had a battery industry, and they would undersell it by 50%, put it out of business, and replace it with theirs. Now, when you go to recently, in the last couple of years, you go into a Home Depot or one of these retail outlets, electronics store, and you buy a flash memory, and you examine that it's half the price of the Taiwan issue, and you look at its constitution, and it consists of 2,000 megabytes of your own storage, 2,000 megabytes in the cloud. What else is in the cloud? Explain to us. How do you defend yourself against this insinuation?
Well, I'll start. Well, I don't deliberately put anything in the cloud. Now, I didn't say nothing about me is in the cloud because I know it is. People, for example, for years have taken pictures of me, relatives, and I say, don't post it, okay? And some comply, some of them don't. So I know there's information about me in the cloud, but you asked what people. In my case, I intentionally do not place anything in the cloud. So all those free services from Microsoft and Google and you name it that says you can store stuff, I don't use any of their drives or any of that stuff for anything. Okay. Now that may be a draconian viewpoint. Okay. Now my children do. Okay. It's how they talk to each other. It's through Facebook. I mean, but you don't know what's going out there. It's the wild, wild west.
I guess I'll counter a little bit with that. I used to be, well, first of all, there's the cloud is a very amorphous term.
Yes.
So when you say the cloud, do you mean Google? You don't use Google search engines? Do you mean Facebook that you're putting your social media in, or do you mean an actual file that you're storing in the cloud?
Right. Yeah.
From a very deep technical viewpoint, I'll take anyone and argue that at least for certain vendors, not necessarily ones based in China, but for certain vendors, it's safer to put or I'll turn it around and say, I'm gonna wear my hacker hat. Would I rather you kept the computer on your desktop? Would I rather you kept the file on your desktop or in the cloud? I'd much rather have it on your desktop. I can get into your desktop way easier than I can get in the cloud. Not saying I can't get into both, but it's way easier to get in the one in your desktop. So it is a risk trade-off. It depends on what you're doing. I do think the service provider is in general, again, like I said, I think we need some law changes. I'm very against EULAs, the end user license agreement. You always click through at the beginning that basically says nothing the company ever did is wrong. It's all your fault no matter what happens. No other industry
And we can change
allows
the
people
rules
to
as
do
we go
that,
along.
right? There's no reason you should be able to. But so other than that, I do think that from a file storage viewpoint, Dropbox has an incentive to put a certain amount of security around it. There's an economic driver, it only takes it so far, just like the Pinto case of they probably are doing we're gonna lose some money and we're gonna have so many lawsuits and all that. But it's still probably doing a better job than even I'm doing on my home computer, and I'm a computer security expert, and I know I can't do it that well. So, we used to basically say there's two types of people in the world, those who know they've been hacked and those that don't. Not a third type. So I do think the cloud gives the company at least the capability to put more resources into it than I would be able to do. But on the social media side, that when you say cloud and you mean Facebook, remember when the product is free, the thing that's being sold is you.
Other questions, this gentleman? And then we'll get.
Mark Mabry, MBA 1989.
Young.
Delighted, yes, well, I'm also a grandfather, so not that young. I was delighted. It's great panel, great discussion. I'd like to turn the panel's attention to diversity. And so we heard a little reference to nature. Nature gave us a couple of eyes, a couple of ears, and some of us have those that don't work so well. And so nature has taught us a bit. So redundancy is oftentimes discussed. Diversity is increasingly important. Distribution is now seen as a good form of defense. Many other methods, including the body's incredible ability to detect and adapt, as we saw in the recent DARPA cyber challenge, where the competing systems that got to Las Vegas, the 7 ones, all independently detected and adapted. My question to all of you is, where do you think we are in diversity? Do you think that's an elixir for us in the future? And what research needs to be done to get us to a better foundation? Because they're going to get in, so how are we going to survive?
Jim, you want to take the first crack? And then
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. So, in fact, I mentioned that Air Force study, and that the first, you probably read it, but the first recommendation was we had to learn where things were coming from. The second one was we have to learn to fight through. So we have to assume our systems are compromised and make sure we have all the things you just said. The easiest way to get the U.S. to have a major military defeat is to get the U.S. to, bomb the U.S. troops, right? By just changing a database of where people are. And again, we try to protect those things, but we need lots of ways to think about that. So some of the systems thinking I mentioned looks very much at those kind of issues. But I think the diversity issue is a really interesting one because it's exactly that issue of economy versus diversity. When I was working at DARPA, this was a while ago, but I was in one of the few groups that were allowed to use Apple Macintosh machines. And they would be coming around and saying, cyber attack going on, shut down your machine. Cyber attack going on, shut down your machine. Oh, you have a Mac, that's okay. And we're sitting there going, what have they missed about the fact that they're trying to get everybody onto the same machine? Now again, there's economies of scale where we can give people the same machine, but introduce diversity. We have something with a patent pending, so I won't talk about it, but we're actually looking at sort of using some of the neuromorphic kind of computing, some of these neural networks and things like that, where you can actually have different chips that all do the same thing, but have very, very different sets of numbers to get there, so that somebody who hacks into one can't get into any other. So you're absolutely right, Mark, surprisingly enough, because you know more about this than just about anyone I know, that these are key things. But I think, the trick is, it's like that systems biology, but there's also places where that analogy fails badly, and so the question is, how do we really nail that down?
Why don't we go all the way in the back, and then we'll come up here.
Actually, can I throw one, can I take his topic a different way? I'll have to say in the cybersecurity field, this is a very unusual panel. First of all, we're all old. Most people in cybersecurity are young. But second of all, we have race diversity and gender diversity, which is very rare in the field. The cybersecurity field is the most undiversified field for reasons people are still trying to figure out and trying to counter. So anything that can be done to counter that should be. But don't get the impression this is a typical.
Right. It's true.
True, good point.
So that is an area that definitely needs work. But.
I'm Jim McCormick, class of '85, and I'm very interested in the human element, and there's a challenge as to how far you go with technical versus human. So I'd like to start by considering the concept of maybe the Russians influencing our election. And maybe there's a technical side where they change the vote counts, and non-repudiation, I think somebody brought up as a way to counter that. You can hold them accountable. But let's just think about they get a perspective, an ideology, introduced to citizens that's going to influence their vote. Let's say that an adversary will ignore ethics and say something that, or maybe they're going to use technologies, use machine learning to know how to say the right thing to the right person. And average citizens are now left defenseless to form their own opinions. I guess what's scary to me is the idea that we can now no longer trust our citizens because of the technical means of our adversaries. And how do we prevent that from happening?
So let me ask Lucy to take the first crack at that.
That's one of the issues of the day. Everybody should read Special Counsel Mueller's indictment of the 13 Russians and the Russian organizations. It's just a fascinating read. It's all about using propaganda to influence voters, and it really gives you an inside look at what exactly you are talking about, because that's what's going on. And members of Congress and these members in the EU are asking Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, what are they going to do about this, and how can you take down fake accounts? And there's a lot of aspects to it. It's a complicated area, but it's also very new. So this is something that I'm sure RPI will be focused on among its other issues.
The other side of it is why were we susceptible to it? Which is the real, which is root cause analysis. Okay, so where has America moved so that Americans were susceptible to the message in the first place? And if you can solve that problem, then it doesn't matter what the Russians say, because the country's consciousness would step up and say, that's junk, we don't need to worry about it.
Well, this just got to be a very long panel.
But I will throw one thing out that, again, we are studying some of this stuff directly, and both in cognitive and computational spaces. But I think one of the key things actually goes back to you guys, which is that the laws that so on TV, when you see an ad, somebody's got to stand up and say, my name is Joe Smith and I endorse this message that you just hated so much, right? On the web, those little Facebook ads, no rule they have to do it, and they're fighting desperately against the regulation, and the folks who can be those regulators don't understand the technology. I was in great pain as I watched the U.S. Congress talking to Zuckerberg.
Well,
And we won't go into the details.
yeah,
But, again, it was very much that if you don't understand these technologies, how are you going to be able to see what we do about it?
I would argue what everyone has to do is recognize what the Russians took advantage of. As you mentioned, there's a lot of cognitive bias work that can go on here, because there's a natural tendency to believe what you already believe, and it takes a lot to bump you off it. So what they're taking advantage of, a lot of what the trolls put in wasn't unfactual. It was true facts. They just got it bubbled up. On this half of the room, they got the part that moved you all this way bubbled up, and on this half of the room, they got the part that moved you all that way bubbled up, and their purpose was to divide us. And they did that because this side only listened to their friends, and this side only listened to their friends. They didn't look at the alternate views. So one of the best counters is to just recognize this could be going on. Just because your friends like something means you should at least listen to the other side. Take try and get at the ground truth. Just because somebody said something doesn't make it true. And we're going to have to get at more of that, I think, is what the average person can do to make that better.
On the legal side, Senator Mark Warner and Amy Klobuchar's bill, the Honest Ads Act, addresses your problem.
So
Tell your congressman to pass it, because it's got a slim chance.
And to pass the changes to the CFAA. And
One more
change the hack
question,
back.
and by the way, the panelists will be here. I'm sorry, we're going to go here and go ahead.
Well, I'm somebody who's from the previous dark age, and we just spent a few minutes talking about something, and I hate to admit it, I haven't got the slightest idea what we were talking about. We talked about diversity. Now, are we going to diversify on the basis of bald-headed, not bald-headed, female, tall, short, heavy, weight? What means of diversity are we talking about? And you just say we're talking about diversity, frankly, that doesn't mean anything.
So there were actually two things going on here, so let me clarify that. And it got confused as we were talking about it. There's a diversity in terms of, a technical diversity in terms of the way you're providing defenses and so on. And then there's a diversity in terms of our workforce and the way we're developing our workforce and who we're bringing into our workforce. I think and those two things were happening at the same time. Maybe the streams got crossed there a little bit, but then.
There's also diversity of thought.
Right.
Right. Religion,
Right.
race,
That's right.
your genetic makeup, is thought. And
Right.
if you don't know how to think like the adversary or like your fellow potential coalitions, then you have disadvantage.
But your proposal on diversity is, frankly, a two-dimensional diversity.
At least.
And there's just so many different dimensions to that as opposed to
Absolutely.
this level of, well, we physicists are always got stuff to deal with. But there's a wide amount of diversity, and we sloppy the English language and confuse ourselves when we're not talking about the same thing, although we're speaking the same language.
Absolutely.
Fair enough. Go ahead, Dr. Jackson, I'll give you the last word before we wrap this panel up here. So,
Well, first, I want to thank the panelists. It's been quite a fascinating discussion. I also want to thank the audience. But I'll say the following, which is why higher education is so important, and why, frankly, I'm a big believer in residentially based higher education. Because we could talk till the cows go out, come home, go out, come back again, about things like diversity, what kind of diversity. But by definition, at the university, we cross generations. We have people from varying perspectives and backgrounds, be they geographic, religious, gender, ethnic, etc. And so we have a great opportunity, which I think we're trying to take, to actually have these sorts of discussions within that context, because that is the one time that we have all of these young people together. The second is, we're a technological university, and I will always say that you have to know something to do something. But it is very important, whatever the foundational pieces are that we imbue our students with, that we bring them together across disciplines and to have them work on problems across sectors in order to develop both not just an appreciation, but how to go about attacking some of these problems. And then my last comment is that, it's kind of a bunch of them mixed up together. One, I think a big problem is that the law does not really exist in these areas, and we attribute it to the speed of technological development and evolution, and it's certainly rooted in that. But we're trying to fit solutions to these problems into a framework that really was not created for it. And someone mentioned the issue of if you wanted to blow up a nuclear plant, you could do it easier by just dropping a bomb or blowing it up or something. And that also makes it easier legally, because the law exists having to do with kinetic warfare, or at least kinetic warfare as we understand it. The difficulty here, and it particularly shows up with cyber physical systems, with what laws pertain. And so I think that's something that we're going to have to spend a lot more time on. And when we talk about bringing disciplines together, it also says why we do have to bring the humanities and social sciences and public policy into what we educate our students to. But what we try to do is have them really work on things that in of themselves are illustrative. Because you all are who you are, because you've gone out into the world and you've had to work and adapt and work with people from different frames. But we have an opportunity in the university to make that happen at an earlier stage. Thank you very much.
So I was going to give this group a chance for concluding remarks. I don't think I'll do that because there's food coming out here and so on. But I would like to thank Jim Hendler, Rodney Martin, Duncan Sparrow, Lucy Thompson for a terrific time together. John Kolb, yes, here, here. And please enjoy. I think the wait staff has gotten some treats for us in the back.